Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. I'm joined by Helena, aka NoJusticeMTG, who I was informed before we went live had heard of Bob Vylan before this weekend's controversy. So you're somewhat of an expert here.
I wouldn't say I call myself an expert, but I'm definitely more kind of tangentially a fan of Bob Vylan than most people who'd not heard of them before this weekend, as my brother is actually a professional musician and he's a big Bob Vylan fan. So I'd hear it kind of there if it was on when he was cooking in the kitchen or something like that. And you know what? It's excellent music, definitely to my tastes. So looking forward to seeing more and more of that on the airwaves to come, hopefully.
It's one of those stories that makes you feel kind of old because it's like you only discover the punk band via the controversy they cause in the... It's like, if you being in your late 30s in the 80s, you're like, oh, the Sex Pistols, who are these? These are these gentlemen who swore on television.
The popular beat combo.
Yeah, that's my way into popular culture, unfortunately. We will, of course, be talking about Bob Vylan at Glastonbury. Keir Starmer is still facing a significant rebellion on changes to disability benefits. We have a great interview on that, actually. We're talking about Peter Thiel's worrying ambitions for humanity. In shows previously, I've sort of mentioned in passing transhumanism. And every now and again, someone in the comments is like, transhumanism? What's that? Well, we're going to explain what it is and why it's a bit worrying, actually. We will end the show by discussing Palestine Action. They say they're beginning legal proceedings to challenge the UK government's plans to ban the group. Do stay tuned for all of that. Of course, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support and make sure to let us know your comments in the YouTube chat, or you can tweet us on the hashtag Novara Live. Oh, and one last thing before we start tonight, I want to make you aware of the next DownstreamIRL. This will be really brilliant. Ash Sarkar speaking to historian William Dalrymple for a wide-ranging conversation at the crossroads of empire resistance and the long shadows of colonialism. That's at Theatre in Hackney on July the 29th. Tickets are available via the link in the description. Let's go straight into our first story, which is the Glastonbury controversy. Leading Monday's front pages in the legacy media has been the furore around one particular set at the iconic music festival. On Saturday afternoon, punk duo Bob Vylan took to the Westholt stage. And here's what frontman Bob Vylan told the crowd. So he said, obviously, we're seeing some effed up things happening in the world. And, we're seeing the UK and the US be complicit in war crimes and genocide happening over there to the Palestinian people. We have seen a strange reaction to people that come out and voice support for Palestine, even though anybody with any kind of moral compass can surely tell that what is happening over there in Gaza is a tragedy. We're not pacifist punks. We are the violent punks, because sometimes you've got to get your message across with violence, because that is the only language that some people speak. Unfortunately, this next song, we want to dedicate it to every single band that is using their platform to speak up for the Palestinian people and speak against the crimes that Israel, the UK, and the US and much of the Western world are complicit in. Vylan then led the crowd in chants of free, free Palestine and deaf to the IDF. Now, of course, if this show seems kind of awkward, you're like, why aren't we just showing you the original clip of Bob Vylan, which you've probably all seen on Twitter? The reason is that the BBC and Glastonbury are quite protective of footage from the festival. So we're going to show you lots of tweets and be reading out what people said instead of showing you the direct footage. Obviously, it's that deaf to the IDF chant, which has proved so controversial. I should be clear, I'm not really any fan of chanting deaf to anyone. I think when a sort of chant starts with those words, probably it's not something I would lead a crowd in chanting. But for some perspective, the IDF, or the misleadingly named Israel Defense Forces, are not really about defense or about occupation. They are the military force currently carrying out a genocide in Gaza. And Bob Vylan's chant came just a day after Israeli newspaper Haaretz published direct quotes from IDF soldiers admitting they were ordered to shoot deliberately at starving, desperate and unarmed Palestinian civilians queuing for aid. And we showed you this story on Friday, just to remind you, a quote from that article from an IDF soldier. We open fire early in the morning if someone tries to get in line from a few hundred meters away, and sometimes we just charge at them from close range. But there's no danger to the forces. I'm not aware of a single instance of return fire. There's no enemy, no weapon. So the IDF and armed forces are occupying, actually not just Gaza, but the whole of Palestine, and shooting people when they queue for food. Of course, this is also the same IDF which has openly and joyfully chanted about wiping out Palestinian homes. Again, I'll repeat, I'm never a fan of chants which start with deaf to anyone, but the media machine immediately went into overdrive to paint Bob Vylan's chant as something it wasn't. So the Mail on Sunday, in quote marks, in fact, transformed the chant from deaf to the IDF to deaf to Israelis, which is not something Bob Vylan said. So what it's doing in quotes, I've got no idea. And Double Down News put together this compilation of the media freaking out.
It does evoke some of the worst moments in human history, shall we say.
People question how on earth could Hitler ever have happened, point to Glastonbury and say, that's how.
Right. Ignorant people who were waving Palestine flags at Glastonbury.
They're being indoctrinated at Glastonbury.
It's appalling, isn't it?
What I found more shocking was the crowd singing along with it.
More proof that you should never trust anyone who pronounces it Glastonbury. As you can see, though, a moral panic was in full swing. And when the usual suspects got involved, Keir Starmer said, "There is no excuse for this kind of appalling hate speech. I said that kneecap should not be given a platform, and that goes for any other performers making threats or inciting violence. The BBC needs to explain how these scenes came to be broadcast." There is, of course, no love lost between Keir Starmer and Kneecap, who led this chant at Glastonbury on Saturday.
One more time. Fuck Keir Starmer!
Now, Glastonbury, to their credit, had resisted pressure to drop Kneecap from their lineup. Other festivals didn't do the same, so Kneecap did lose gigs, but not from Glastonbury. They held their ground. Of course, the BBC refused to stream the Irish rap group's performance, but they still played. Glastonbury, though, weren't similarly supportive of Bob Vylan. This was the statement put out on Sunday by Emily Evis. So she says, Glastonbury Festival was created in 1970 as a place for people to come together and rejoice in music, the arts, and the best of human endeavour. As a festival, we stand against all forms of war and terrorism. We will always believe in and actively campaign for hope, unity, peace, and love. She said, with almost 4,000 performances at Glastonbury 2025, there will inevitably be artists and speakers appearing on our stages whose views we do not share, and a performance presence here should never be seen as a tacit endorsement of their opinions and beliefs. However, we are appalled by the statements made from the Westholt stage by Bob Vylan yesterday. Their chants very much crossed a line, and we are urgently reminding everyone involved in the production of the festival that there is no place at Glastonbury for anti-Semitism, hate speech, or incitement to violence. Now, I mean, this is going to keep coming up on today's show. I'm not surprised that Glastonbury put out a statement like that. And actually, interestingly, when it came to Kneecap, my guess was that when Kneecap sort of put out that statement apologising for having told people to, well, allegedly, whatever, it seemed as if they'd told people, go home and kill your MP or something along those lines, or your Tory MP. They put out sort of quite a strong apology for that. And I think that Glastonbury might have pressured them to do that. And I'm not surprised that Glastonbury said, someone saying deaf to anyone is something we reject. But what I do really object to is Emily Evis implying that what we saw on that stage was anti-Semitism. Because there's nothing anti-Semitic, about saying deaf to the IDF. Like it's clearly an incitement to violence to some degree. Obviously, I don't think he's going to incite anyone in the audience to go and kill the IDF. It's a different, army somewhere else committing a genocide. But it wasn't anti-Semitism. Today, the BBC delivered their own apology. They weren't in the mood to stand up to the moral panic. So they said millions of people tuned in to enjoy Glastonbury this weekend across the BBC's output, but one performance within our live streams included comments that were deeply offensive. The BBC respects freedom of expression but stands firmly against incitement to violence. The anti-Semitic sentiments expressed by Bob Vylan were utterly unacceptable and have no place on our airwaves. We welcome Glastonbury's condemnation of the performance. Again, anti-Semitic statements. You might not like the statements, they weren't anti-Semitic. The BBC went on. The performance was part of a live stream of the Westholt stage on BBC iPlayer. The judgment on Saturday to issue a warning on screen while streaming online was in line with our editorial guidelines. In addition, we took the decision not to make the performance available on demand. The team were dealing with a live situation, but with hindsight, we should have pulled the stream during the performance. We regret this did not happen. In light of this weekend, we will look at our guidance around live events so we can be sure teams are clear on when it is acceptable to keep output on Such an apology might not be enough for the likes of the Daily Mail. They seem to think BBC chiefs should face charges for streaming a punk show. There's a punk show where something controversial is said, and now the BBC should face charges. The Daily Mail, the Times, the Express, the Telegraph, and the Sun all led with Glastonbury on their front pages today. It does seem unlikely, though, the police will be investigating the BBC. Can't really see that happening. Somerset Police, though, have confirmed that they have begun a criminal investigation of both Bob Vylan and Kneecap's performances. Now, I haven't managed to work out exactly what Kneecap said that might provoke such an investigation. This is a statement from the police. Video footage and audio from Bob Vylan and Kneecap's performances at Glastonbury Festival on Saturday has been reviewed. Following the completion of that assessment process, we have decided further inquiries are now required and a criminal investigation is now being undertaken. A senior detective has been appointed to lead this investigation. This has been recorded as a public order incident at this time, while our inquiries are at an early stage. Bob Vylan, whether or not this investigation goes anywhere, they are already facing professional consequences. They've been dropped by their agent in response to the row. And today, they've had their visas to the United States revoked. So the Deputy Secretary of the State Department tweeted this afternoon. The State Department has revoked the US visas for the members of the Bob Vylan band in light of their hateful tirade at Glastonbury, including leading the crowd in death chants. Foreigners who glorify violence and hatred are not welcome visitors to our country. It's kind of retro, isn't it, Helena? Sort of like having a punk band saying something this controversial lead the news and the political agenda for such a long time. I feel like I am in, the 70s or something.
Yeah, it's all very merry White House clean-up TV, isn't it? It's interesting to see the soy right embracing cancel culture for once by wanting to see them banned from America, the entire country. It's like when Tyler, the Creator, got banned from Australia, I believe it was, all those years ago. What's interesting about this discussion and about this whole story, right? There's two kind of parts of this that I think needs kind of undoing and untying. So there's the discussion about whether it's incitement, whether it should or not count as incitement or not. Obviously, I'm not any kind of legal expert. This is not a legal argument, but a moral one. And there's the second part is about the nature of the speech and what it says about the people who say it and the attitudes towards Israel or indeed minorities, etc., etc. Let's tackle the first point here about the incitement and the potential police charges. And again, when it comes to incitement, does anyone actually believe that what Bob Vylan was saying there is everyone should go out and fly to Palestine and join the Al-Qassam Brigade and start killing members of the IDF? I think you'd have to be pretty insane to think that that's what they were saying there, rather than something more metaphorical in terms of opposition to the IDF and what they are carrying out in Gaza and their role as an occupation force, a half a century long occupation force in regards to Israel's occupation within Palestine. I mean, for example, if you make a statement against a person or an institution, these are two different things, right? Do you think all the people who say, quote unquote, death to America, do you think they're calling for the death of every person in America? Well, no, of course not. They want an end to the American international imperial regime, for example, in the same way that I would expect the argument would be made by someone like Bob Vylan. Well, we want the institution of the IDF dissolved, right? And we say death to the IDF, not because we want all of the soldiers to die immediately, but because we want to see the IDF disbanded as an institution, as an occupying force in Gaza. And what's interesting, when it comes to this incitement argument, in legal terms and the public perception of the legality, is they're making this comparison with Lucy Connolly, saying, oh, well, she was sent to prison for tweets, which were counted as being incitement, right? She pled guilty to, really important context there. And yet the lefties, the racial minority, in which case the singer from Bob Vylan is, saying, oh, well, this is another case of two-tier policing, in as far as if they don't get the same kind of charge as Lucy Connolly, then these are two different things. But then you've got to remember that Lucy Connolly's tweet was about actual violence against people, burning down a hotel with real refugees in it, which is what ended up happening after that tweet, as has been found by the courts, actually to be incitement, right? Because that's directly targeting people. And yet the IDF is an institution, not the individual refugees. I think that's where the fulcrum of that argument needs to lie. And so I don't think that you can really say that these are two similar situations when the targets are different, the context is different. And as I said, just the likelihood of them actually inciting something is wholly different when, as I said, no one is going to go there and start attacking IDF soldiers because it was chanted on the stage at Glastonbury. Glastonbury, as the posh people in the media have decided they're going to call it now. The second part of this discussion is regards to people describing it as anti-Semitism or hate speech. Now, the idea that it's hate speech as if being a member of a military organization engaging in belligerent occupation is somehow a protected characteristic is really funny to me, genuinely hilarious, the level to which people perceive that hate speech is just when someone says something and I hated it, rather than an actual reality where it's targeting a specific minority of people who can choose what they're doing, right? People talk about conscription and the IDF. Well, you can just go to prison and ignore it, and many people do, and they're right to do so. And I applaud people like Tal Mitnick who do refuse conscription. So it is technically a choice, even though the other choice isn't a particularly great one if you don't want to serve in the IDF. And when it's targeted for being anti-Semitism, there were two tweets that I think perfectly encapsulate why this discussion about it somehow being anti-Semitic is being absolutely ridiculous. One of them was just saying, well, they hate all Israelis, they hate all Jewish people because they have to end up becoming members of the IDF. And then another tweet that said, all these people don't know is that Druze and Circassians and Arabs sometimes voluntarily enlist in the IDF, so they're attacking their own. I'm like, well, if you're admitting, which is the truth, of course, that the ethnic minorities within Israel can also enlist, and some of them are indeed conscripted. Arabs are not, I believe Circassians and Druze are, at least Druze and Circassian men are drafted into the IDF, then the reality here is that we do oppose them if they are non-Jewish members of the IDF, because it is not their ethnicity that people oppose. It's not the ethnicity that was being attacked in the statements and the chants that were said by Bob Vylan. It is their existence as an occupying force in Gaza. It is the material relationship between the occupier and the occupied that has such broad opposition, and is the actions that they have undertaken, regardless of the ethnicity of the people who do it, which is being opposed here, right? My opposition to Israel's crimes in Gaza is absolutely unilaterally the same in my level of condemnation of every single ethnicity that commits those crimes, right? A Druze member of the IDF is just as monstrous to me as any other ethnicity who serves in the IDF. Likewise for all the others. So the idea that this is anti-Semitism when the IDF isn't even wholly Jewish is crazy to me. That's a crazy, crazy, crazy thing. It's especially crazy when you realize that if your argument is, well, you're attacking this entire ethnicity by attacking a military force for a country that claims that it represents them, if that's your defense position, then all you're doing is signaling to people globally that, oh, well, the Israel's crimes must therefore be part of the broader Jewish community, which of course it absolutely is not. It absolutely is not. But if your argument has to be that you must defend these people as somebody who wants to protect Jewish people, then all you're doing is linking those things together. And that is, in my mind, anti-Semitic, because in my mind, genocide is not a Jewish value. But that's not a value that any Jewish person that I know subscribes to. So the idea that you must link these two things together, it's dangerous. It's a really dangerous thing to do. And like, even then, like, even if it was, like, if you wanted to attack a certain group, even if it was ethnically homogenous, right? Like, I don't know, if someone theoretically said, death to the Interahamwe, is that Hutu phobia? Because it's a particularly ethnic group that makes up the majority of that particular military organization? Nonsense, absolute nonsense to be able to make those claims, because, as I said, it's about their material relationship to Palestine and nothing to do with their ethnicity. And likewise would be the case in terms of the Interahamwe, is the fact that they committed a genocide is why we oppose them.
If the BBC wanted to keep all support for Palestine off their streaming platform, they would have struggled, because there was, it seems, widespread support for Palestine throughout the Glastonbury weekend. Again, we're not going to be able to show you clips, so we're going to show you tweets instead. Jade Furwell getting the Glastonbury crowd to scream F you to cuts in social assistance, transphobia, the arms trade, protest censorship, and support for genocide, live on the BBC. So she's from Little Mix. I really like Jade Furwell, actually. We also have CMAT, who I also really love, leading the crowd in chants of Free Palestine at Glastonbury yesterday, and Elijah Hewson, who I have to admit I haven't heard of, saying, I'd like to dedicate this next song to the people of Palestine being starved for the sake of lunatics. We have to say as our greatest strength is freedom of expression. So lots of people watching the BBC coverage and clipping it when people say something in support of Palestine or against Israel. Apparently the Libertine, Snow Patrol, Rizzle Kicks and Wolf Alice also expressed their support for the Palestinian struggle. And this was a political response this weekend that I found particularly interesting.
The Israeli embassy says what happened at Glastonbury raises questions about the glorification of violence. Do you agree?
I think that is a challenge, and that's why I don't think anyone should be cheering it on. I'd also say to the Israeli embassy, get your own house in order. What happened in the West Bank this week by Israeli settler terrorists needs to not only be condemned, it needs to be acted upon. And Israel cannot continue to look the other way while its own people are carrying out unwanted acts of terrorism and violence. They wouldn't tolerate it rightly against their own citizens. Their citizens are doing it to Palestinians, and it's got to stop.
Now, Wes Streeting before that did sort of make a very moralistic condemnation of what Bob Vylan had said. And I mean, we could at this point, as we can with sort of any Labour politician ever, point out how pointless and hypocritical it is to sound tough when you're talking about the Israelis, yet not do anything about it, still transfer them arms, still give them diplomatic cover, right? Harsh words don't mean anything. But we've made that point many times. What I found interesting there is he is definitely running to be leader. Right, Wes Streeting is definitely running right now to replace Keir Starmer, because I think he knows his problem is that the Labour membership is far to his left. Even though lots of sort of the most left-wing people have left, it's still far to his left. It's going to be much more in favour of someone like Angela Rayner. And so looks like he is getting out there trying to say, look, I'm the one who says tough stuff about Israel. You know, maybe Angela Rayner wouldn't have said that. So I think he's flying a kite. Let's say, I think we should limit ourselves in how much credit we give to a guy, because words are very, very cheap. But that does tell me that, he doesn't think Keir Starmer is going to be in that job forever. Keir Starmer is still facing a significant rebellion on changes to disability benefits, despite making concessions at the end of last week. Now, the original bill was set to tighten the requirements to be eligible for personal independence payments for all disabled people. After the concessions, those changes will now only apply to new applicants to PIP. So those already in receipt of the payments will be able to keep them. And the government also brought forward funding, which it says will help disabled people get into work. And they've said disability groups will be involved in a review of PIP assessments. And there's been lots of criticism that that's all quite vague. And up to 50 MPs are expected to rebel tomorrow. They will likely include Vicky Foxcroft, who resigned as a minister to oppose the welfare bill before those concessions were made. Disability groups in general seem to be opposed to the bill, even though some have welcomed the concessions. And comedian and activist Rosie Jones gave an interview this weekend explaining her concerns.
A lot of politicians, when this U-turn came about, were saying, don't worry, it won't affect disabled people who already get their benefits now. That is very problematic because A, they're not thinking about the millions of people who will become disabled in the future, but you are also forgetting that millions of people who are in danger are getting reassessed, which could be me, so no one is safe.
The government haven't been helped today by a new impact assessment from the Department for Work and Pensions, which suggests that even after the concessions, the changes will push 150,000 people into relative poverty. Number 10, for their part, are disputing those figures. They say it doesn't take all of the changes into account. And Wes Streeting was out on the airwaves on the BBC on Sunday, encouraging MPs to fall in line.
The reason why there's been such a debate like this in the Labour Party is because all of us, ministers, MPs across the board, don't want to be in a position where on a Friday afternoon someone comes to our surgery and says, I'm disabled, and as a result of changes that you've supported, this has impacted on me detrimentally. And for us to be sat there thinking, well, that was never supposed to happen. So it's important we get this right. As the Prime Minister,
that's exactly what you're going to have if you have this two-tier system, isn't it?
No, we're working with disabled people to make sure we get this right in terms of
I just want to be absolutely...
But no one will thank us, honestly, no one will thank us if we carry on as we are with the status quo, with an unreformed system that doesn't help people into work, doesn't provide an adequate level of support for people who can't work, and the system goes bust, or the voters say, you know, we're not going to support this anymore, and we're going to vote for someone else who doesn't believe in welfare at all.
To get a view of someone with experience of navigating Britain's disability benefit system as it currently stands, I spoke earlier to Adie. Adie is a 30-year-old PIP and Universal Credit recipient from Brighton and a member of Mad Youth Organise, which is a campaign led by young people with lived experience of mental health distress. And they're organising to build a collective response to the mental health crisis. I began by asking what she makes of Labour's welfare bill after last week's concessions.
Before the concessions came in, clearly the bill was unacceptable. It was built on excluding people like me from the process, people with chronic conditions, with fluctuating conditions, with severe mental health issues, all of which means that we are more likely to score more widely across point criteria rather than scoring highly in single categories. The concessions do nothing to address this issue. All they do is try and give some unhelpful reassurances that people who currently access benefits will continue to do so after the bill is passed. We're very clear that this is completely unacceptable. We're not willing to throw young disabled people, pre-disabled people under the bus by accepting these concessions. All this will do is just knock the can down the road and entrench people who are going to be experiencing the same issues as I have over the last few years for generations to come. It's going to affect them, it's going to push them into poverty, and it is going to cause loss of lives.
Could you talk about your experience as a disabled person in Britain and your interactions with the welfare system?
Yeah, of course. So I'm quite fresh into the benefit system, the welfare system. I have been struggling to get the mental health care that I need for over a decade now. When I was 13, I started struggling with quite persistent suicide ideation. That's something that I still struggle with now. It's intensified recently because of the wider complexity of my health issues. I, about 5 years ago, got my COVID vaccinations, and I started to experience long COVID symptoms from this. That started off as very severe light sensitivity, migraines and headaches. And it's now progressed to the extent that my everyday life has changed so significantly. I have lost all of my independence. I'm not able to do little things like do my food shopping, leave the house on a hot day for longer than kind of half an hour, do any kind of activities in my household without having to lie down every hour. And the way that my mental health has been affected because of that is awful. I've had to access the welfare system since last April, when I became unable to work because of all my health complexities. I first applied for Universal Credit, which is the out-of-work benefit that anyone who is in my position who is unable to work has to apply for. The application process for that in itself was extremely long-winded. I had to fill out very, very long bits of paperwork. For me, personally, with my health difficulties, there were increasing barriers because I find it so difficult to engage with technology. Even the DWP, who are there to support disabled people, their systems are not set up to support people like myself. I had to delay applying for the benefits for the Social Security for 3 months because I just wasn't well enough to engage with the system. When I did finally engage with the system, I found out I would have to wait several months before anyone would even speak to me. When I was finally booked in for my assessment for whether I was capable for work or not, I remember it was scheduled in for 10 o'clock. I got 3 or 4 calls from the assessment service, starting from 9 o'clock when I was just trying to get myself calm, get myself fed before my assessment, where basically I was threatened that I would not be attending if I didn't attend an hour earlier because someone else had not attended their assessment. I had quite a severe meltdown then before I went into my work capability assessment, and I think my capacity was severely reduced for the 2 weeks after that, having to recover from that. That was just the universal credit process, once I had successfully gone through the assessment for that and was waiting for my outcome, I realised that that was not enough money for me to live on. I get around £846 now of universal credit every month, and that is there to cover all of my costs, which includes housing. My rent is £700, so there you go. I have £146 to live on every month. If I was just accessing universal credit, it's not enough money to live on. I can't even nearly scratch paying for my bills. It doesn't go far enough to give me enough money to eat. I then had to apply for personal independence payment to try and increase the amount of money I was accessing through Social Security, to make sure that I could feed myself. And I went through the PIP process. I waited 8 months to speak to an assessor. I again had a very similar process of the DWP then scheduling my assessment, cancelling it on the day. They didn't even cancel it. The assessor didn't turn up 2 days in a row. At this point, I was too unwell to attend that assessment on my own. My girlfriend had to book 2 mornings off work consecutively to be able to sit with me to do that assessment. And it then got delayed by 2 weeks, which was ironically the window when the Green Paper was announced in March. So in the week leading up to my actual PIP assessment, I was sitting watching the government announce that it was about to cut the support that I was in the process of applying for and allows me to stay alive and feed myself and maintain the very, very low quality of life that I have, but just about gets me through. The PIP assessment itself was brutal. I ended up having to do it on my own with my girlfriend on a phone call, miles away, supporting her mum who just had a hysterectomy. Again, the system does nothing to acknowledge what we go through when things are delayed or cancelled. So I had to do that with very little support. I came out of the assessment, again, an absolute shell of myself. It's horrific to have to explain all of the hardest parts of your life when you're getting no support from the NHS and just begging and hoping that the assessor on the other side of the call is going to believe you. It took a further few weeks before I got the outcome from my assessment. I, in some senses, look like one of the lucky people. I got a 4 in one of my areas, and then I scored pretty much 2s on everything else. But the reading through the report from the assessor was one of the most painful things that I've ever done. Whilst the assessor acknowledged my mental health conditions, which in some senses I'm lucky, lots of people don't get believed when they talk about their experiences. But reading through that, the assessor had judged that I have no long COVID symptoms, that my brain fog doesn't exist, and that I am lying essentially about the pain and just, awful experience that I'm going through. And at this point, I am not well enough to then be able to go and challenge that report. I'm just having to sit with the outcome that I've got. There is no justice in this system. It is designed to break you down. It is designed to make you feel tiny. It is designed to make you feel like the effort that you put into these assessments and accessing this social security is better spent looking for a job, which frankly I am not able to do. I'm devastated seeing what the Labour government has done in proposing this bill. It has been put forward purely as a cost-saving measure and not as a way of truly reforming the system in the eyes of disabled people. And the only way we can move forward with dignity now is for this bill to be scrapped.
First of all, I mean, that sounds like a really horrid experience, and my solidarity to you there. I mean, I suppose why this issue potentially is confusing to people is because the experience you've just described sounds horrific to the extent that not many people would want to go through that, frankly. And then the government will say, but it is the case that the number of people applying for and receiving PIP is sort of radically increasing. I mean, I suppose in your instance, there's an obvious explanation for that, which is you've got long COVID and there was a pandemic, and maybe that explains a large part of the increase. I mean, what's your analysis of how sort of at the same time we can have this horrible system while more people are applying? Do you think just the population's getting sicker?
I do think, yes, there's some truth that the population is getting sicker. I think we have to acknowledge that we've just experienced 14 years of austerity, where we've seen the biggest reductions of public services funding in a very, very long time. I've experienced that as a young person. I've experienced that within my profession, with working within the system. Before I became too unwell to work, I was a youth worker. And I worked particularly with young people experiencing mental ill health. I worked within homelessness. I worked within local authority. I've seen the youth mental health crisis and how it is hitting communities and individuals and families. And what we are calling on at Mad Youth Organise is for our politicians to start looking at the drivers of that youth mental health crisis. It's very clear that capitalism is making us sick, that corporations are extracting wealth, the very little wealth that is left within young people's communities. We know that the housing crisis and increasing rents, we know that the lack of access to NHS health services are having a huge impact on young people. For example, I truly believe that if I'd received the proper healthcare at any point over the last decade, then maybe I wouldn't have become so unwell with long COVID. And that's the same experience for thousands of young people across the country. Wes Streeting wants to peddle this message about overdiagnosis, which is fundamentally false. Young people are getting diagnosed because they are struggling more and more. The cost of living crisis is hitting young people more and more. We're struggling to be able to feed ourselves, keep a roof over our head, and that is unacceptable for the government to then come forward and say that the solution to that is to take the last remaining bits of social security, of support that young people have access to in the UK. The problem, particularly with these concessions, is this is only going to further entrench that poverty for generations down the line. And we must ask MPs to stand firm. If they didn't feel that these welfare cuts were acceptable yesterday, then they're not acceptable today, just because some people are being given reassurances.
That was Adie speaking to me earlier today. Bella Milroy with a super chat says, thank you to Ellie for the generosity of sharing the reality of navigating the welfare system as a disabled person, or sharing the reality of what it's like navigating the welfare system as a disabled person. It is a very vulnerable thing to do. Yeah, it was a really, really interesting interview that I thought. And yeah, I do think that sort of the way the disability benefit system is described, because we're sort of, everyone's defending how it is now compared to the cuts that Labour wants to bring, gives this kind of false impression that it's actually really, it's kind of easy to be disabled on benefits now, and we need to make it a bit harder, when I suppose what you heard there is the reality is very different. We should be making it, I suppose, more comfortable, not less, let's say. Peter Thiel is, alongside Elon Musk, the most influential figure on the new tech right. Like Musk, Thiel was a co-founder of PayPal. He was also the first external investor in Facebook, which made him $1 billion, I think. And he is the chairman and founder of Palantir. That's the software company specializing in surveillance, which provides services for both the US military and the NHS. Thiel is worth $20 billion, making him the world's 103rd richest individual. As an early backer of Trump, he has a lot of power and influence, which is worrying, seeing as he doesn't seem to know whether he wants any of us to exist.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
yes?
I don't know. I would
this is a long hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit in this.
Should the human race survive?
Yes.
We got there in the end, I suppose. Yes was the final answer after 20 seconds of being very unsure. If you're wondering how that question even came up, the broader conversation was about the prevalence of transhumanism in Silicon Valley. Now, transhumanism is the belief that we can augment ourselves with technology, creating a richer form of experience and ability. And at its extreme, it includes the idea that we could upload our minds into data centers and achieve immortality. This is Peter Thiel again.
I also would I also would like us to radically solve these problems.
Right.
And so, you know, it's always, I don't know, you know, yeah, transhumanism is this, you know, the ideal was this radical transformation where your human natural body gets transformed into an immortal body. And there's a critique of, let's say, the trans people in a sexual context, or I don't know, a transvestite is someone who changes their clothes and cross dresses. And a transsexual is someone where you change your, I don't know, penis into a vagina. And we can then debate how well those surgeries work. But we want more transformation than that. The critique is not that it's weird and unnatural. It's, man, it's so pathetically little. And okay, we want more than cross-dressing or changing your sex organs. We want you to be able to change your heart and change your mind and change your whole body. And then Orthodox Christianity, by the way, the critique Orthodox Christianity has of this is these things don't go far enough. Like that transhumanism is just changing your body, but you also need to transform your soul.
This isn't a Glastonbury story again. This isn't someone who's taken too many mushrooms. They're hanging out at the back of one of the late night tents, sort of just riffing. This is the 103rd richest person in the world, who's probably one of the most significant people in Silicon Valley and one of the most significant people on the American right. Now, perhaps the one thing you can say in defense of transhumanism is that it's better than posthumanism. Now, posthumanism, which also seems surprisingly influential, isn't about augmentation, but replacement. Now, Richard Sutton was the winner of the 2024 Turing Award, which is considered as being equivalent to the Nobel Prize for computer science. A really significant guy. He won that award for his role in the development of modern computational reinforcement learning, which is how they train models like ChatGPT. And his views on humanity's future were summarized well in a tweet in 2023. So he says, "The argument for fear of AI appears to be, 1, AI scientists are trying to make entities that are smarter than current people. 2, if these entities are smarter than people, then they may become powerful. 3, that would be really bad, something greatly to be feared, an existential risk." And then he says, the first 2 steps are clearly true. So AI scientists are trying to make entities that are smarter than current people, and they will become very powerful. But he says the last one is not. Why shouldn't those who are the smartest become powerful? Again, this is not just some random guy on Twitter. This is one of the most influential computer scientists in the world who developed the reinforcement learning technology that makes LLMs so powerful, large language models so powerful. Helena, there's an awful lot you could pick up on here. I suppose I'll begin with, have you come across the transhumanists?
I mean, it's been a pretty kind of popular part of, especially in like science fiction literature for a very long time. And of course, since we've seen kind of the advent of the tech bro as a kind of force in the international and kind of scientific discourse, there have been these people who are, what about what things can we do to make the best versions of ourselves, right? And, I have some sympathy with this idea, right? I don't think necessarily there's anything wrong with the idea of using the power of technology to augment human existence. I think that there are plenty of guardrails that we should put down there, but fundamentally the idea that we can use technology to make life better for everybody, sure, it depends on what you're proposing in these instances. And talking about uploading people's digital minds so that they can live forever, that's actually a really interesting subject of a great video game for people, gamers in chat. If you enjoy this kind of stuff, play the horror game Soma. Really, really interesting philosophical discussions there about what immortality even means within that context, right? But the issue I have is that when it comes from tech bros, when it comes from people like Peter Thiel, none of my kind of tacit, I guess, acceptance that there are some benefits to the use of technology to make people's lives better, none of that exists when you're looking at these kind of psychopathic people, in my mind, like Peter Thiel. That's my opinion of him, right? In the, do I think these people have the best for humanity in their mind? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not in the slightest, right? And there's a problem. There's this myopic thinking that I've seen in the kind of tech bro world, in this kind of billionaire world, this kind of Curtis Yarvin sphere of the population that people like Peter Thiel live in, which is fundamentally, there is a thing that being rich does to your brain, where it wires you to believe that somehow you must be correct about everything because you've succeeded in the world of capitalism, right? So the guardrails that would be necessary to try and pin people like this back don't exist, because they fundamentally believe that what they support is good, it is the future, and they have the power to be able to put that into practice, right? So I don't have any kind of confidence that anything that Peter Thiel would want for humanity would be in the best interest of anyone other than himself. And that's the big problem. You see this with crypto people all the time, right? There's no dispassionate discussion over the benefits or the lack of benefits towards the adoption of the new cryptocurrency world that they want to see. Any amount of opposition to the adoption of such a thing is described as fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Those are the words that they would use, because they fundamentally believe that what they have is the future. And therefore, anyone who disagrees isn't somebody with reasoned critiques or worries about the negative externalities of such a system. They are just people who haven't got with the program yet. And if you're fundamentally looking at things like transhumanism, if you're fundamentally looking at things with regards to how we can make society better through technology, right? Because you were the person who's going to benefit, you're financially going to benefit from this stuff, then the issue that you come to is, if you've personally believed that you can do no wrong, then you're not going to be the person who's going to be able to actually protect people from those negative externalities. That's where my issues come in, especially when you look at people who are fully engaged in AI. Any amount of criticism of them, that affects their bottom line. So they're going to be less receptive to that criticism than somebody who's looking at this from a neutral perspective.
I think Peter Thiel and a lot of these guys, and when I sort of read about transhumanism or listen to them speak, there's an almost kind of fascist adjacent elitism where sort of the 8 billion people who inhabit this world don't really matter. The only people that matter are the people who they have sort of assigned the labels of being smart and ambitious in Silicon Valley. And if they accidentally end the world, it's not the end of the world. If it was for a chance to make, them and their 20 closest, friends immortal, it would have been worth the risk. That's what I get from them when I'm listening to it. It's like, well, we might as well take the risk because the upsides are huge and the downsides is, everyone dies, but I don't really like them anyway. That's also what I got from his hesitation. I want to go back to that Thiel interview. This is the last clip I'm going to show you of it. I listened to the whole thing. It was interesting. I thought it was bonkers, to be honest, but worrying because of the influence this guy has. The context to the next clip is that you'll like this. Peter Thiel has the curious belief that Greta Thunberg is the Antichrist. I'm not making this up. His argument is that she wants us all to fear climate change so much that we welcome in a totalitarian world government, which would enforce stagnation on the entire world with climate change as the sort of big boogeyman that enables her to do it. I don't think she would lead the government, but she represents the Antichrist anyway to this guy. The host, Ross Douthat, had a curious suggestion about who might really be the one enabling such an authoritarian future.
You're an investor in AI. You're deeply invested in Palantir, in military technology, in technologies of surveillance, in technologies of warfare, and so on, right? And it just seems to me that when you tell me a story about the Antichrist coming to power and using the fear of technological change to sort of impose order on the world, I feel like that Antichrist would maybe be using the tools that you were building, right? Like, wouldn't the Antichrist be like, great, we're not going to have any more technological progress, but I really like what Palantir has done so far, right?
Yeah,
isn't that a concern? Wouldn't that be the irony of history would be that the man publicly worrying about the Antichrist accidentally hastens his or her arrival?
There are all these different scenarios. I obviously don't think that that's what I'm doing.
To be clear, I don't think that's what you're doing either. I'm just interested in how you get to a world willing to submit to permanent authoritarian rule.
Well, but again, there are these different gradations of this we can describe. But Is this so preposterous, what I've just told you, as a broad account of the stagnation that the entire world has submitted for 50 years to peace and safetyism?
Two questions which shouldn't be that difficult to answer in an interview. Do you want humanity to continue to exist? And are you the Antichrist? And Peter Thiel really, really struggles with both, which I think tells you a lot. As I say, I'm increasingly worried about these guys because they have so much influence and power, especially over the technology of the future. Palantir, of course, they're the military company that is really trying to bring the advances of AI into that sphere. So, I mean, I don't have details about them. I know they sort of work with the Israelis, for example, when it comes to surveillance of Palestinians. I imagine they're also the kind of company that's looking at swarms of AI-enabled drones and all the things that could definitely kill us all. But he doesn't seem to mind, right? Because he wasn't sure if he wanted us to exist anyway. So, maybe I'm the Antichrist, maybe I'm not, maybe we all die, maybe we don't. Oh, isn't it kind of interesting anyway? That's what I get from him. I don't trust him. I don't think he expected me to trust him, but I'm worried about him, let's say. Pro-Palestine direct action group Palestine Action has started legal proceedings to challenge the UK government's plans to ban the group under terrorism laws. And prescribing Palestine Action would make being a member of the group or inviting support for it a criminal offence under the Terrorism Act and carry a maximum sentence of 14 years in prison. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper published an order to prescribe Palestine Action along with two other groups today. They are a neo-Nazi group called Maniac Murder Cult, and I suppose it does what it says on the tin in a way, and an ultra-nationalist and white supremacist Russian militant organization called the Russian Imperialist Movement. The alleged leader of the Maniac Murder Cult is currently standing trial in the US for plotting an attack on minorities with poison candies given out by a man dressed as Santa. So I don't think this happened. It was a plan of his. The far-right Russian imperialist movement has a military wing called the Imperial Legion, which is currently fighting in Ukraine. Now, comparing Palestine Action, which carries out non-violent direct action to prevent a genocide, comparing them to either of these groups is obviously absurd. But there is some concern that Cooper has added the two genuinely extremist groups, specifically so that MPs will be more likely to vote the prescription order through. If you say, well, I don't want to vote for this because I don't really think Palestine Action are terrorists, you say, well, does that mean you support the maniac murder killer cult? Inside the Home Office, though, tension is reportedly high, with a senior Home Office official telling The Guardian this anonymously. From desk to desk, colleagues are exchanging concerned and bemused conversations about how absurd this is and how impossible it will be to enforce. Are they really going to prosecute as terrorists everyone who expresses support for Palestine Action's work to disrupt the flow of arms to Israel as it commits war crimes? It's ridiculous, and it's being widely condemned in anxious conversations internally as a blatant misuse of anti-terror laws for political purposes to clamp down on protests which are affecting the profits of arms companies. It's from a senior Home Office official speaking to The Guardian. The vote on prescription is expected to be debated in the House of Commons on Wednesday and in the House of Lords on Thursday, though Palestine Action hoped that a High Court hearing on Friday could postpone a ban, if it is passed, coming into effect. Meanwhile, on Saturday, last Saturday, the International Centre for Justice for Palestinians held its annual event in London covering media double standards, US policy, and the future of Gaza. Now, Novara Media's Ceci Golding spoke to key figures at the conference about the pending prescription of Palestine Action. Tayeb Ali, a solicitor, criminal and international law. He's not a solicitor and a criminal and international law specialist. I don't call him a criminal. And director of the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, told Novara Media this.
There's a huge difference between a terrorist organization and a protest organization. And, the right to protest, the right to freedom of assembly are fundamental values in the United Kingdom. The fact that the British government, the Labour Party government, has lost the argument and has decided to to prescribe Palestine Action as a terrorist organization is just unbelievable. And that for a Labour Party government to do that as well is absolutely disgraceful. It's an abhorrent apparent abuse of the terrorism powers in the United Kingdom. And actually what it does is it diminishes the meaning of what the Terrorism Act is. The Terrorism Act is not designed to silence people. It's designed to prevent serious loss of life.
The event's keynote address was given by Israeli historian and emeritus professor of international relations, Adie, who had this to say.
All my sympathy is with Palestine Action. These are young, idealistic people who are committed to truth and justice and law. But they see that their government is completely indifferent to all of these values, and it's not listening. And the police is more repressive than ever in preventing peaceful pro-Palestinian protest. So they feel that words are no longer enough, and they have to take direct action in disrupting the supply of weapons by Elbit, the Israeli company, to Israel. So it's the British government which is not just complicit in Israel's war crimes, but it's an active partner and an enabler. And the people from Palestine Action are heroes who are taking great risks to themselves in trying to stop Britain from helping Israel to commit genocide.
This is about Keir Starmer's petty authoritarianism. It's that we have taken the correct line, right? We are the people who are in charge. I am the man who is in charge here, right? Exactly the same kind of petty authoritarianism that you could associate with this time as director of public prosecutions. And that's why they see people who undermine their governance, who undermines the position they take as a government. So you have to ban this out of existence. Now, does this mean that they've lost an argument? Well, authoritarians tend to lash out when secretly they know that they're wrong. So there could be some elements of this, but broadly, I think it is more telling of their position as authoritarians who don't like being questioned than it does about them knowing that they're wrong and wanting to ensure that any kind of opposition to that, anything that lets the public know that they're wrong gets banned out of existence, right? Because I found a really interesting tidbit of information here. If you look at the absurdity of having people like Palestine Action alongside Russian imperialist fascists and neo-Nazi murder cults, right, is that the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a Palestinian resistance group who operate in Gaza and the West Bank, right, who have engaged in some amount of terrorism, like airplane hijackings in the 70s. They were involved in the Second Intifada. They were people who were part of Al-Aqsa flood on October the 7th, right, attacking military targets, as NGO Monitor apparently said. I don't know the full facts of that. But anyway, they were a Palestinian resistance group on October the 7th. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine are not a prescribed terrorist organisation in the UK, despite being so in the EU and the USA. And this was asked by Christian Wakefield of Tom Tugendhat in 2024, I believe. Like, why is these people not prescribed? And just get a kind of non-answer to it. So they're not prescribed as terrorists, but people who deface planes with some paint apparently are. How very, very weird of a position to take, which is why I believe it's about the authoritarianism internally rather than a kind of specific principle.
It's definitely not about a specific principle. Let's wrap up there. Helena, always an absolute pleasure having you on as a co-host when I'm hosting.
But always appreciate it. One last point I would make with regards to that Peter Thiel clip. It's very interesting, the guy who named his company after the all-seeing orb that Saruman uses in Lord of the Rings, right? To say, well, Greta Thunberg and the Antichrist wanted to save humanity from climate change. It really is like Saruman fears the future tyrant of Frodo Baggins, doesn't it?
God, your references are so good, Helena. God. I was just in too much. I thought we had to go on to our next story, but that was great. Let's wrap up there. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.